Hello Internet, my name is the Golden Stalfos, and today we're going to talk about why the Artemis Fowl movie adaptation was doomed to fail from the start. Please note that in this video I'm not talking about why the movie adaptation that we actually got is very bad, because it's obvious why it's very bad. It's bad because Disney doesn't care and made innumerable horrible decisions, like making the villain the hero and putting a bunch of shit from later books into the movie from the first book, and also just really bizarre, bad casting choices. Like, they made Holly white for some reason. They also made Butler black for some reason. Here's why that's fucked up and weird. Holly is supposed to have chestnut skin, and Butler is supposed to be some vague combination of European and Asian traits. Oh, and also in the book, it specifically says that their family is called Butler and has been for so long that it's possible the word Butler comes from their family name. And so taking a family that is super attached to the idea of servitude and making them black is maybe just a little fucked up, Disney. Maybe just a little. But putting aside the absolute bad faith of Disney in their adaptation process, I want to talk about what challenges an actual attempt to adapt the book into a film would face, and why the combination of these challenges probably pushed Disney into just giving up and doing their own dumb bullshit instead. Now, the first major problem with adapting this book is that it's a very short book. Now, to be fair, many films have been made out of much shorter books, but they usually invent a bunch of nonsense whole cloth. You know, like how the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs story originally doesn't have characters or a plot or anything. It's just a weird, quirky poem about a weird, quirky place. But then they managed to make 2 whole films out of it that just, like, have a lot of plot and characters and stuff, because they made all that shit up from scratch. And that's really easy to do in a story like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs that has nothing to go off of in the first place, and really fucking hard to do in a story like Artemis Fowl, which is perfectly paced and self-contained and has all the elements it's supposed to have from start to finish. There's not really room to add anything. The only thing it really makes any sense at all to add is some small details that hint towards the stuff that happens later in the series. You know, like Cowboy Laboratories should probably be mentioned once or twice throughout the story. But other than that, The second major problem is sort of an extension of the first, and it's that a huge portion of the book's original appeal comes from the way it's narrated, which obviously doesn't translate to screen and is also word count that can't be converted into runtime. A lot of the appeal of the book is the way that Colfer goes on and on with humorous descriptions of characters or relationships or places or events or weird new technologies that don't actually have anything to do with the plot. He just wanted to take a minute to world build, and none of that would make it into a movie at all. And, like, you might try to visually recreate the same feeling that his words create, but I don't think you could for most things. For example, at one point he described Butler's hands as being the size of a hand of bananas, which is a silly, humorous comparison that takes you out of the serious moment and makes you chuckle for a second, but also kind of accurately describes that his hands are unbelievably huge, because if you think about it, a hand of bananas is fucking massive. It's like a baseball mitt. Like, that's crazy. So it's descriptive, it's humorous, it's subversive, and it sticks in your brain. But if you just have a person on screen who happens to have hands that size, it doesn't evoke any of that, and it can't. You're just going to lose that part of the appeal when you make it into a film. He actually does this kind of thing all over the place, where he juxtaposes things in order to acquire humor, you know, as those people over in the UK tend to do. I mean, he's Irish, but whatever. I'm not saying they're the same, don't get angry, but they certainly have similar cultural backgrounds, and at least in this case, use humor in similar ways. Anyway, like, for example, the main character, Artemis Fowl. He is 12 years old, but he goes around wearing an Armani suit and talking like a grown up and condescending, everything. And that kind of works in the book because, you can picture it and you can think, wow, that's ridiculous. But on screen, like when you actually see a 12-year-old in a suit condescending to adults, you just think, my God, what an annoying prick. Or possibly, oh, that is cringe as fuck. And I don't think there's any way you could get a 12-year-old in a suit on screen reading Artemis's lines and not evoke one of those two reactions, because it just doesn't play the same way in person as it does in your head, because the comical juxtaposition of those ideas is only comical when it's imagined. Because when you're imagining Artemis Fowl, he can be cool in the moments he needs to be cool and ridiculous in the moments he needs to be ridiculous, and one doesn't undermine the other because they happen at different times and you don't care. But that's a lot harder to pull off on screen. So those are the first two big problems with adapting this movie. The movie wouldn't be long enough. Like, I would estimate that if you just straight retold the events of the book in a script, it would probably be like, I don't know, 90 minutes? Maybe you could stretch it to 120, but I kind of doubt it. And granted, 120 is all you would need, but yeah. Also, to be fair, 90-minute films aren't unheard of, but they're usually not major motion pictures. They're usually animated productions for children that go out for a little bit and then directly to DVD after that. And you can't get the kind of money required to make a major motion picture unless you can prove that your movie's going to fit certain criteria when it hits the market, like having an appropriate runtime. And then the third big problem is a problem of audience. Now, some people, namely the people who run Disney, might think it's very simple. It's a children's book, so you make it into a children's movie. Easy peasy. However, the problem with that is that this is a first adaptation, or I suppose in our theoretical case, a second adaptation, of a book that came out 20 years ago, aka within people's current lifetimes. And the people who read the book as a kid are now adults who would be buying the tickets. This isn't like adapting a 300-year-old children's book and making it still be a children's movie. That has sort of a timelessness to it. If it's something you grew up with and now you're going to go watch it as an adult, there has to be some appeal for you now watching it as an adult. And maybe you could bank on the nostalgia being a big enough appeal to get people to watch the new movie, but it wasn't enough to get me to watch the abomination that Disney made. I watched some reviews about it, but that's it. Also, bear in mind, I'm one of the younger people to read these books because I was 5 when the first book came out. And these books were written for 12-year-olds. And I didn't actually even start reading them until high school. But just to do the math, someone who was 12 when the first book came out in the year 2000, they're now 33. Yeah. You're old. Old. The Sandman is coming for you. Father Time's gonna bend you over his knee or some shit. I don't know. Anyway, my point is that at 25, I'm probably one of the younger people to be enjoying this series. And it kind of makes sense that if you're going to make money off of a movie, then you're going to make that movie for the demographic who is attached to the series and wants to see it, wants to pay for tickets, can afford to pay for tickets, A kid's movie is fine, but none of the kids who will see the kid's movie have read the books already because, I mean, some of them might. The books haven't stopped existing. They're still in school libraries and stuff all over the place. But I imagine that most of the people who are interested in Artemis Fowl are not children anymore and might not want to see a children's movie. So that might be a problem for anyone wishing to adapt the children's book into a children's movie. But of course, if you adapt the children's book into an adult movie to appeal to all of those people who have, grown up with the books and are now adults, that necessitates some level of change that might not be the best idea. That's a problem. I mean, don't get me wrong, Colfer's books never talk down to you the way a lot of other children's books do, and it's very possible for an adult to pick up Artemis Fowl and enjoy it, but there are certainly some things in there that were only included to appeal to children, like all of the fart jokes, and the poop jokes, and the butt jokes, most of which center around Mulch Diggums. Don't get me wrong, I love Mulch, he's great, perfect character really, but you gotta admit, there's a lot of poop jokes around Mulch, and if you're not 12, they get real old real fast. So that's the third issue. The final issue that I think is worth talking about is the actual, production cost. There are a lot of things in the Artemis Fowl story that would be very expensive to reproduce. I mean, for one thing, a huge part of the movie takes place in a mansion. And the part of the movie that doesn't take place in a mansion takes place in a super high-tech underground facility run by magical beings, including a centaur. Oh, and also all of these super high-tech magical beings are 3 feet tall, including the centaur somehow. And then there's a troll, which is 15 feet tall, a lumbering monster beast that just tears through shit. And there's explosions and tunnels and fights to the death and all kinds of stuff that is cost intensive for films, but doable. But the larger problem comes with the fairy folk themselves, because it's kind of a Hobbit situation, right? It's possible to do what the Lord of the Rings did and make everyone who is supposed to be really short just look short through a bunch of camera tricks and special angles, and maybe have some characters on stilts sometimes, whatever. And it might even be possible in this current climate to hire a bunch of people who have dwarfism to play a lot of the roles that would go to the shorter characters so that it works. But quite frankly, I'm not sure if that works for all of the characters. I mean, yeah. Also, Butler is supposed to be, unreasonably huge. In the book, his description kind of is all over the place. When they give hard numbers, it's, kind of underwhelming. At one point, they say he's, just over 2 meters tall. And I'm so am I, and I'm not that tall. What are you talking about? But then every time they describe him interacting with anyone, whether it's a human or a fairy, he's towering over them by a lot. So you have to assume that he's closer to 7 or 8 feet tall. And as you might guess, there are a limited number of actors who are bigger than everyone else in the room at all times, and also can convincingly look like they know martial arts, and also at all fit Butler's vague racial description, which the more I think about it, the more I think that he was being a little racist when he wrote that, but whatever. Because he just refers to Butler as Eurasian. And when I first read that as a high schooler, I assumed he meant he's just a vague mix of the people who live between Europe and Asia, some weird combination of Balkan and Mediterranean and Middle Eastern and all that, But I recently went back and listened to the audiobooks, and there are some other times where he clarifies their heritage a little bit more. And it's very clear that he just means they have a European parent and an Asian parent. And that's as descriptive as it gets, which makes no sense. Also, Juliet is blonde, even though that's not how genes work. If one of your parents had dark hair, you would have dark hair because recessive. But anyway, my broader point was that some of the casting decisions would be basically impossible to nail because his descriptions are so broad and vague and seemingly change from time to time. So yeah, I think those are the biggest things that would make the book kind of hard to adapt if Disney or someone else had actually made a real attempt to adapt it instead of just throwing shit at the wall. Everything else is kind of minor. Like the only other thing that's even kind of big is that these books clearly were written one after another without really thinking about what would happen in the next book. So there's little if no setup for things that will happen later. There are a couple of things later on where he like leaves a thing hanging and then decides to pick it up in a different way, but it doesn't feel like that was the original plan for the thing he left hanging. It was just like convenient. So, you know, maybe an adaptation would need to bring in some threads to sequel bait, but other than that, And there are a couple of ways around some of these issues, like the short runtime thing. I mentioned how there's not really a lot of room to introduce new stuff, but there kind of is. Like, you could add some runtime to Holly's life before she gets kidnapped, or to Artemis's life before he executes the plan, or both. And there might be room to add some extra wrap up in the epilogue, but that's about it. You couldn't really insert anything in the middle of the story without kind of ruining it. So yeah. But yeah, that was the point of the video. I just wanted to talk about Artemis Fowl, and yeah. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next life. Laters. Alright, thank you guys for watching that video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that dumb YouTube stuff. Follow me on all my other social media stuff. I got Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and I have a Patreon, if and only if you have money to burn. And if you do have money to burn, maybe consider donating to an actual charity instead. There are always a few linked in my description, just in case. I mean, I do appreciate it, but there's probably people who can use it more than me. Me and my girlfriend play video games she's never played before on twitch.tv/thegoldenstylphos every Saturday, sometime after 6 p.m. US Mountain Time. And also I sometimes use that channel to do challenge runs and game creation tutorials. So if you're into any of that, please check that out. Also, if you check out our streams and you like the performance that my girlfriend puts on, she streams by herself on her own channel called Awesome Possum Pie. And be sure to leave positive comments down below for my girlfriend who volunteered to edit my videos for free because she's awesome. And yeah, thanks so much for all of your support. And thanks again for watching.